Welcome to CommercialDrones.fm, the podcast that explores the commercial drone industry, the people who power it, and the concepts that drive it. I'm your host, Ian Smith. Hey everybody, and welcome to Commercial Drones FM. Ian here, and I'm sitting in San Francisco, California with Ernest Earon. He is the Executive Vice President of Artificial Intelligence at REIN, a drone insurance company, but not just drone insurance. Very important distinction to make. Welcome to the show, Ernie.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you working with Morgan and Chantal over the past, I don't know how many months to try to make this happen, but really excited to finally have you here. Some listeners might be wondering, why do you have a drone insurance company on the podcast? But if you are a devout listener, then you already know we've had one before. So that was Skywatch in the past. And so maybe you can just tell us, first of all, not about REIN, not about drone insurance yet. Tell us about yourself. And I'll preface this with saying some people will probably know that you co-founded Precision Hawk.
That's right. Yep.
So yeah, maybe tell us just your background in general and take it all into Precision Hawk and beyond.
So background in general, well, actually my background is in space. My degree was originally, I was working on artificial intelligence for planetary exploration. The whole idea being use lots of data to find neat things and let machines do what they're good at. That spun into, working on that same kind of idea with drones, trying to let the machines do what they're good at, focus on collecting data, starting to use that data to do something important. We started Precision Hawk. It went. I was there for a long time, and very, very proud of what Precision Hawk has become. Decided, my skill set can be used in other interesting places, and so I've jumped over to REIN right now. So I'm heading up the data team, essentially, as you mentioned. And our focus really is on very similar things, using those same kind of adaptable algorithms, that kind of big data, deep learning kind of stuff to get access to the real insights in large amounts of data.
And this is an interesting title, at least for me, for a quote unquote insurance company. So like, is someone very focused on artificial intelligence common in I guess I want to call them like the legacy insurance companies. Like if I go and look at like a Progressive or something like auto insurance, whatever. Like, is this common? Is this new? Like, how do you guys view this? Like artificial intelligence applied to insurance. How does this work?
So I think there's sort of two answers to that. One is, for quite some time, I think the insurance industry, the legacy insurance industry, has been aware that large amounts of data can give them insight that is really hard to get any other way. Now, if you look at auto and things like that, they've got hundreds of years of claims data that they can look at, and they can nail down a profile of a risk very, very accurately, or at least very, very precisely is maybe a better way to put it. But when you've got a new industry, something like drones, which is really only a few years old, there's not decades of claims data that they can say, oh, hey, I know that this drone's going to crash more often, or this pilot or whatever. And stuff is changing so fast, both in terms of the technology, the platforms, the applications. Everything is way too dynamic to just say, oh, it is a 25-year-old male, driving in an inner city is going to crash his drone more often than not. It's not like that anymore.
So there's like I think like most people, at least in the US, it seems to be a thing. I remember when I was getting my license and I was like, 15 or something, you have to learn about, okay, well, you have to have car insurance and the parents, when they buy you your first car, they're not going to buy you a red car because for some reason, like red cars are attributed to I guess either getting pulled over more or a personality that might do crazier things while driving. So if I have a red drone, I mean, is this kind of you know what I'm saying here? Kind of is this seems to apply the data that's always been out there for automobies and then now for drones.
That's right. This is the kind of stuff that we're trying to learn right now.
Gotcha.
Red drones versus black drones. I mean, black drones are pretty cool looking too. So maybe black drones it'd be the same category. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff that we're trying to learn. And so that's where, the AI, the machine learning stuff comes into play, because some of these patterns, some of these signals underneath the noise are not obvious if you just looked at it and said, oh, we've had so many crashes or whatever. And there are so much information available that is not related to claims. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of telemetry logs from drone flights that you can analyze, but there's no way to really just say, oh, those all led to claims of so much. So you actually have to use these advanced tools to dig in and get access to the insight in there. It's not just a question of this kind of car crashes and it costs us that so much because it was red, or people driving red cars speed. It's not like that. You have to dig a whole lot deeper through a lot of noise right now. We don't have the legacy stuff.
And what my follow-up question, which I kind of think we covered, but like, why should people care about an insurance company? It's like, why do I have someone from an insurance company on? But the underlying technology to me is really cool. And I think this like spells out like a lot of the future technology, which you guys will be working on and which we'll cover a little bit later. As a user or maybe a customer or, and actually let me preface anything I say in this. And also I'm covering Ernie here because there are a lot of regulations on what you're allowed to talk about as an insurance company. And so there's a lot of things we can't say. So with that said, like if it is slightly vague, don't worry. And if there's other questions that I'm not asking, it's by design. So as a user, though, of your product or just like a general drone operator commercially, why does this matter to me? Like, how does this affect me?
Well, I think, if you look at, from a very traditional sense, you take the standpoint this is aviation, right? These are aircraft. And as such, it really behooves you to, be responsible and make sure that you've got the coverage that you need, should something happen. And we're not just talking about, making a claim and replacing a Phantom 3. That's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about, the bigger claims or the other issues that I think are much more serious. In our case, we cover commercial operators. And that's really where I think it's even more important, because as a commercial operator, you have a responsibility to make sure that you're covered in the event of a claim or something like that. And so it is important as I think this industry goes from being, a fairly scrappy little hobby to something that is moving into a very fully deployed information gathering tool across a whole bunch of different industries. And obviously, with people you've been talking to, there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's branching out all the time into new applications, new technologies, and things like that. And so, it really is important to make sure that you're doing things the right way.
Totally agree. One of the things you mentioned being deployed, like it's actually out there. So I don't know if we actually got into, so I introduced you as EVP of Artificial Intelligence at REIN, but one of your products is droneinsurance.com.
That's right.
And so there you go. So there's multiple like products, or there will be more products that are going to be adding on under the REIN umbrella. And then REIN is spelled REIN for those who don't know. Right.
Yeah. So drone insurance was our first product. And one of the interesting pieces as we were building that product that we quickly learned is, well, actually, there's several things. One is a lot of the tools and a lot of the capabilities that we built when we were creating this platform to make it very easy, very smooth, and very automatic to buy insurance for your drone, was that these tools could be used in a lot of other insurance and risk applications. And so you're right. We start there, and then we say, hey, these tools are really powerful. This platform is really powerful, and our ability to integrate into other platforms is really powerful. And then we started to see pull from a lot of different markets in a more traditional insurance spaces, as well as things that are new and novel, which is where I think the data piece really is valuable.
Do you guys, or VCs or whoever, do you refer to this as, I feel like I've heard InsurTech? Is this technically? Okay.
Yeah, this is InsurTech.
InsurTech. Okay, so we got FinTech, InsurTech, all kinds of tech. So, speaking of deployment, so walking back a few months, maybe years ago, a lot of people know I used to work at Drone Deploy. I was running the app market, which is the integrations. And so I had the pleasure to work with Morgan, specifically on the REIN side /droneinsurance.com to roll out the Drone Deploy integration. Now, that's pretty cool. One of the reasons why I mentioned that is first, that was like the kind of seed that grew into this eventual podcast. But also Drone Deploy's user conference is happening this week when we're recording this in San Francisco. And you are here because you had a presentation.
That's
now,
right.
I got to see a lot of the slides from the presentation, and there was some super, super cool stuff in there on like all kinds of cool data and like just, I think it was, well, no, you explain. How about you explain your presentation? But what I'm really interested, no pun intended, interested about is just like a lot of those insights that I think you had, or assumptions, like the data points in some of your slides.
Right.
So tell us about that.
So that's what I was talking about, was primarily using data to help understand and to help reduce the risk of operating drones. And that's not necessarily just, what's going to happen with if I go outside on any given day and fly. What are the risks there? I think that's something that we as operators have a pretty good handle on. But what I was talking about more is, analyzing this data over the entire industry. We've got, as I said, many hundreds of thousands of flight logs that we can analyze and say, you know what, this is where the conditions or the behavior or platforms tend to have issues. And what you can do then is trying to work with like an enterprise operator or a fleet operator or a fleet manager, and try and sculpt their operations in ways to slowly move away from being in that risky situation. So a great example would be wind. So interestingly enough, as operators, I'm sure everybody knows, like, well, if it's too windy, then we don't fly. But there are certain platforms that handle the wind better than others. And it's not always the obvious ones. It's not always that the heavier drone handles wind better than the light one. And so if, in our case, we're looking at, because we're pulling in data from like environmental data, other data sources, infrastructure, and things like that. And let's say you're a large operator operating in Texas. Texas is a pretty windy state. And if you've got a lot of operations out there, and you're using a drone that we know from all this analysis is susceptible to wind, and you're operating in, a high wind corridor, maybe we can work with you and say, over time, you should be shifting your fleet from this drone, which is, doesn't do so well in the wind, to something that does a little bit better. And we try and help them sculpt their program to avoid that kind of issue.
This seems unique. Like I'm not, so like, for example, just from the consumer side, like, I don't have a car because I live in San Francisco and I love it, but I do miss having a car. It's a caveat right there. But I can't imagine a car insurance company coming to me and saying, hey, you live in this area and it's more susceptible to risk for this type of vehicle. We recommend you do this. Like, is this a novel approach that you guys are helping companies manage their risk down a little bit too?
So I guess from my view from the cheap seats, I guess, in the insurance industry, because obviously this is something that I'm rapidly learning about, the learning curve is very steep, is that insurance companies are doing this more and more and more. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, I think a lot of the insurance companies don't want their products to be viewed as commodities, right? They want to add a whole lot more value. So it's not just about, yes, I can cover your car, and you forget about me as soon as you've done this until next year when it's time to renew. Mm-hmm. They want to be working with you, so they have a relationship with you.
I see.
And so they can say exactly that. Did you know that in your area, the Honda Civic faces an awful lot of car theft because there's a port right there where they can take those cars, strip them for parts, and ship them right offshore.
Gotcha.
So they do stuff like that. And I think it's even more important when you start, again, getting into larger organizations and enterprises where, commercial trucking is a great example. You've got single organizations that are operating thousands of trucks, and an insurance company can work with them. It's no longer about just what's the best price. It's how do you price it? How do you manage that fleet? How do you manage your operations to minimize risk? And there's benefits for everybody involved in that. One, in the case of trucking, the roads become safer because you're trying to work with the company to make their operations safer. The insurance company has to pay out fewer claims, which is always good.
True.
And then the operator doesn't have the accidents, doesn't have the claims, doesn't have the downtime, all these things. So it ends up being a really great opportunity to sort of benefit everybody. And it's something that the insurance companies seem to be doing a lot more as they're trying to really increase their value to their customers.
And now, a quick word from our sponsors.
Genius New York invests millions of dollars in drone and tech startups each year and is looking for its next $1 million team. The business accelerator located in Syracuse, New York, provides your startup with resources, mentors, and industry-leading connections, plus a chance to compete for $1 million. So if you have a startup focused on unmanned systems, IoT, automation, or data analytics, don't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Apply today at geniusny.com. What could your startup do with $1 million? Go to geniusny.com and apply today. Step into the growing season with this very special treat from MicaSense. For this month only, that's July 2019, buy a MicaSense Altum sensor and get a 6-month Agisoft Metashape license included for free, and enjoy high-quality thermal and multispectral imagery with advanced analytics. So the Altum sensor integrates a radiometric thermal camera with 5 high-resolution narrowbands, producing advanced thermal, multispectral, and high-resolution imagery in just one flight for advanced analytics in agriculture. So during July, get your MicaSense Altum sensor with a free 6-month license of Agisoft Metashape by using code AGI2019 at micasense.com. Okay, back to the show. So now that you were explaining that to me, I'm realizing that obviously that it's heavily incentivized for an insurance company or organization to like minimize their risk, but by helping the client minimize their risk. And then, the circle of life goes around. And then I was thinking about the OBD2, those readers that sometimes they'll give you to stick in your car, and it feels like Big Brother maybe, but it's a very similar situation to being able to get logs off of a drone flight and then seeing how the drone's being operated and everything. So that's really interesting. And I love the examples and the data that you had from your presentation, just about like, hey, this is a high wind corridor. Maybe you should be using this. Like that was kind of the slides that I was looking for, or looking at. And so I'm for some reason, and I just learned the other day, I'm always learning about insurance. This is something that'll never stop in my life. Like I just learned that there's reinsurance companies for companies that insure the insurance companies. I had no idea that existed. So that's just fascinating. Now so we've kind of talked about the drone thing. What other industries or verticals are you guys looking at? Is a REIN artificial intelligence, machine learning backed insurance product potentially going to come to a consumer, or are you guys, staying more on like the business side of things? Like give us like a little bit more of like the strategy and like how you guys viewed the entire market where you could apply your technology to.
So we're actually fairly agnostic to being in any particular vertical. I think where we see our value in the space is in places where this platform, which is highly configurable and is easily integrated, where we can make an impact there. That's one. I think being able to rapidly deploy products for an insurance company or for I guess any kind of risk-based enterprise is something that we do very well. And where my world sits in particular is in places where you've got a new industry or a new market or something like that, where there isn't this big backlog of historical data that you can look at. And instead you're trying to react really quickly with as much data as you can before you step in so that you know what the risk looks like. Self-driving cars is a great example of that, because how do you insure a self-driving car? Right now, our insurance paradigm is built around insuring the driver. But if you buy a self-driving car, who do you insure?
Yeah.
and more important than how do you validate that how you're insuring it is right? How do you say that you're pricing it properly? How do you say that you're even selecting the risk appropriately?
I love this conundrum. This is quite a conundrum, because it's like, yeah, if a self-driving car crashes, who is to blame? Like, is it the driver behind the wheel that wasn't touching the wheel? Is it the manufacturer? Is it like all the way down to the people that wrote the code for it? Like,
right. And this is something that is like actively ongoing. If you go to like mobility conferences and things like that, the insurance companies are there. They're trying to talk about it because yes, it's who do you insure? For instance, the driver, if you're pushing firmware down, if there's a fix in a firmware to fix something, but a driver doesn't update their car, then whose fault is it? Or let's say the driver's on the North Slope of Alaska and can't update their car, then whose fault is it? And I think it's less about apportioning blame as making sure that the right people are protected as much as anything else, and just having that understanding of what this is going to be like going forward when this is going to become the norm.
Yeah, there's a parallel here, kind of to like who's flying the drone for like beyond visual line of sight operations. I mean, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too much, but like it's just funny because. Like, yeah, you have the person that's monitoring the drone at this point, but then like the drone's going to be flying itself, and like who do you go to? The software that's controlling it, maybe it's a third party, and then the drone might have its own collision avoidance. It might make a decision based on that, but it could be wrong, and it's vetted, and it's not, and then so many variables here. It's pretty intense, like working with that. I mean, I imagine this is something that you guys have to contend with and like figure out, like, how do we distill this to the most like simple and logical way that it makes sense for all the parties for like liability's sake.
Right. And this is, as you say, this is a real challenge and it's not just in insurance. It's, if you're trying to push out a self-driving car, how do you prove to a regulator that it's safe to release out onto the roads? You need something to back that up. So it's not just about insurance, these kinds of questions. But I was at a conference in Montreal, the Moving On Summit, and there were a lot of people from the insurance industry there talking about these new mobility modes. And one of the conversations was exactly around this, an entire workshop just on this. And I think one of the more insightful comments was that, responsibility comes with choice. So that if you have the opportunity to do something that you should do and you don't, that's where you can put it. And I think that's sort of it's a very high level and the devil's in the details when you get down to it. But if the person who's actually making the decisions is the one who ultimately has the responsibility, and then looking at it from that perspective. But whenever you have a challenge like this, when you've got new industries that are really don't know how to deal with old industries and old frameworks and old regulations. So this exactly mirrors drones. A few years ago when all this was ramping up and the regulators were saying, I just don't know how to deal with this. That's when you get these huge opportunities for companies to come in because the established players are established. Their frameworks, their methodologies are established. And somebody new can come in and say, hey, here's an opportunity for let's do something different. Let's do something novel.
Have you ever thought about, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I think about this randomly, like when I'm going to sleep and then I can't go to sleep. It's the problem where like there's a self-driving car, it's driving itself, the human's inside, and then there's only two decisions that the car can make in some scenario. And it's like basically calculated. It already knows that both of them will be fatal. One of them will be like an quote unquote innocent bystander, not in the vehicle, and the vehicle has to make that decision, or it's like fatal to the passenger in the car. And then this kind of like thing. Have you ever thought about that? This is totally separate from anything, right, by the way. This would be a my views are my own kind of thing for you. I don't know how the hell to think about that.
Well, I think so. I think it's an interesting thought experiment to think about, well, what would happen? And I think it's important to think about things like that so that you can then understand what the ramifications would be if you made one decision over the other. So it's not necessarily disconnected from how you think about these things. The drone flying and you cut power over top of a high school football game to avoid a parachutist coming in, right? Like, those kinds of decisions are not that far-fetched, especially in this world, like you said, self-driving cars making decisions and things like that. It's the problem that Will Smith's character had in iRobot, right? The robot made the wrong decision in his mind, and so understanding that I think is important. I don't think there's an obvious answer for this. Like this is not one that. But I think it's important to think about it, and I think it's important to try and understand how that impacts how we build these systems and how we look at it and how we look at the data and the machine learning tools that are being used to design these controllers. Yeah. Because the other issue in a lot of these cases is the systems that we put in place, the learning tools we put in place, often are only as good as we are. And they reflect a lot of the same kind of biases and things like that we as developers have that we don't know about. And I think it's really important that we have these thought experiments to say, well, what would happen, and how do I make sure that the system that I'm developing reacts in sort of like the old programming edict. They do what you tell them to do, not what you want them to do. And so how do you look at that?
Yeah. Well, hopefully that helps me sleep better at night.
Or not.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'll always be interested in that and how people look at that problem. So, wow. So, okay. So what then is next for REIN? I mean, what are you guys looking at? Is there anything on the horizon maybe coming up? Any kind of tidbits here? Like you guys are got a couple offices, you're venture funded, like all this, like I'm imagining just more growth and everything. I mean, is there anything like specific you can point us to, or maybe just like a stay tuned and see?
Well, I think as a venture-backed startup that is experiencing pretty aggressive growth right now, I can always just caveat it with a stay tuned, because whatever I say this month, might be completely overshadowed by something next month. It's true. But that said, I think there's a lot of opportunity in some of these markets that we've talked about. We've touched on drones. That's still a rapidly evolving program or industry beyond line of sight and things like that. Things are changing, and markets are adapting and industries are adapting. So this is something that I think is going to keep certainly me interested for a very long time. I see no end in sight in there. And then there's some of the more traditional stuff where things are being turned completely on their heads by digital systems, automotive, commercial trucking, things like that. There's huge opportunities there. Self-driving cars, logistics chains, just analyzing what is essentially a hugely interconnected world that has a lot of legacy systems that are sort of coming into this digital network. And when you do that, when all of a sudden you open up literally millions of data points in an operation, how do you use that to improve and optimize that operation? How do you use it to make it safer? How do you use it to make it more cost effective for everybody involved? There's lots of opportunities there.
Well, I'll be watching you guys closely. If you're listening to this and you want to learn more, currently check out their first product, droneinsurance.com. Literally, it's in the name, the URL. Or check out the Drone Deploy integration. There's a Drone Deploy integration there that'll allow you to connect your account from droneinsurance.com to your drone operation and get insurance and all that stuff. And that's where you'll find out all your pricing and all the interesting other little tidbits there. Thank you so much, Ernie, for being a guest on the show. I'm glad we could finally make it happen.
Yes.
I'm excited for this to air and for people to find out about this. So yes, thank you for coming, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
It has been. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure, and we really enjoyed having you on the show. So everybody, that was Ernest Earon, the EVP of Artificial Intelligence at REIN.